Three men owned Coca-Cola before anybody else did. The first sold it off in pieces for pocket money and was dead inside 2 years. The second sold it for $25 million and missed everything that came afterward. The third ran it for 60 years and had nobody to leave it to. Between them, they built a company worth more than $300 billion today, and all three families are gone from it. 9 glasses a day. The counter was marble. Jacob's Pharmacy stood on Peachtree in downtown Atlanta, and on the 8th of May, 1886, somebody slid a nickel across it and got back a glass of something nobody had tasted before: syrup from a jug mixed with carbonated water from the fountain. 5 cents. That price was a choice. Most fountain drinks that year cost 7 or 8 cents. Coca-Cola came in under all of them, and the nickel does not move again for 73 years. John Stith Pemberton made that syrup, and he was 54 years old. He had been a lieutenant colonel in the Confederate Army. In April of 1865, in the fighting at Columbus, Georgia, he took a saber slash across the chest, and he was given morphine for the pain. And like a great many wounded men of that generation, he did not stop taking it. He spent the 20 years afterward as a pharmacist in Atlanta, mixing tonics and patent medicines, which in that era meant products that promised to fix headaches and exhaustion and nerves, and were sold with no requirement to prove any of it. His best product was called French Wine Coca. It was wine, coca leaf, and cola nut, modeled on a French tonic that was fashionable at the time, and it sold. Then Atlanta went dry. Local prohibition measures in 1885 and 1886 made his bestseller illegal, and Pemberton had to build the same idea again without the alcohol in it. What he ended up with was a syrup meant to be mixed at a soda fountain. His bookkeeper named it. Frank Mason Robinson thought 2 words beginning with the same letter would look well in an advertisement. So he took the coca leaf and the cola nut and wrote out Coca-Cola in the flowing Spencerian script he had learned as a clerk. That handwriting is still on the side of the can. A bookkeeper drew it in 1886, and nobody has been able to improve on it since. The whole business rested on the soda fountain, which was where a town went in the afternoon. Social, respectable, and in a South where temperance was winning, the place you went instead of the saloon. A man in an apron mixed your drink in front of you, and you drank it standing there. There was no bottle. There was no taking it home. The product existed at the counter and nowhere else. And Pemberton was not selling refreshment. He was selling a cure. The early advertising offered it for headache, for exhaustion, for what the period called nervous afflictions, which covered a great deal of ground and committed to nothing. Now the first year. The figures come from the company's own history and get repeated everywhere, so treat them as reported rather than audited. About 25 gallons of syrup sold, around $50 taken in, and roughly $73.96 spent on advertising it. Which means the most successful consumer product in the history of the world lost money in its first year of trading. It sold 25 gallons. It took $50. It spent more than that telling people it existed. If you want to know how that becomes 300 billion, stay with this. Subscribe and the rest of it comes to you. 9 glasses a day is barely a hobby. It is a man with a jug and a hope. And the man with the jug was running out of both. What Pemberton sold. Pemberton was sick, and he was in debt, and he needed money faster than a 5-cent drink could produce it. So he began selling pieces of it. The record of what he sold and to whom is genuinely tangled because he did not sell it once. He sold overlapping fragments to different men across 1887 and 1888 in deals that did not entirely agree with each other, and untangling them afterward took took lawyers years. The surviving accounts do not agree on the individual amounts either. What they do agree on is the scale. He sold roughly 2/3 of his interest in pieces for a figure in the low thousands of dollars, and the last of it went for a sum in the hundreds. Small money. Even in 1888, small money. Enough to settle some debts and not much beyond that. The reason the record is such a mess is that Pemberton was not running a company. He was a sick man with a formula, selling shares in an idea to whoever was in the room, and there was no register of who owned what. Two different men could walk away from two different conversations, both believing they had bought the same thing. Some of them started making their own versions under their own names. For a while, there was more than one Coca-Cola on sale in Atlanta, and the question of which was the real one was a matter of whose paperwork was better. He kept a fraction back, and the reason he gave was that he wanted his son to have something. On the 16th of August, 1888, John Pemberton died of stomach cancer. He was 57. He was broke. He was still addicted. He was buried in Columbus, Georgia, in the town where he had been wounded. The drink he invented was 2 years old and selling 9 glasses a day in one city. His only child was Charles "Nay" Pemberton. Charles held on to his piece of the formula and went on selling it himself. And in 1894, at about 40 years old, he died of an opium addiction of his own. That is the end of the Pemberton line's connection to Coca-Cola. 6 years after the first glass. No Pemberton has owned any part of the company since, and there is no claim, no royalty, and no stake anywhere in the records. The man who invented it received, across all his sales, an amount in the low thousands of dollars. The company built on it is worth, at the time of writing, more than $300 billion. There is no villain in that arithmetic. He was dying and he needed cash, and the men who bought from him had no way of knowing what they were buying either. 9 glasses a day, and a ledger in the red. One of those buyers, though, understood something the others did not. $2,300. Asa Candler was born in Villa Rica, Georgia, in 1851, trained as a pharmacist, and suffered from chronic headaches. That last detail is not incidental because Coca-Cola was sold in those years as a headache remedy, and Candler was reportedly a customer before he was ever an owner. He began buying Pemberton's scattered fragments in 1888, and he kept buying. And he bought out the competing claims, and by 1891 he owned all of it outright. The figure that gets quoted for what he paid, by the company and by everyone else, is about $2,300. Take it as the total outlay across several years, in cash and in rights, rather than a single check handed over on one afternoon. $2,300 for all of it. The formula, the name, the logo drawn by the bookkeeper, everything. On the 29th of January, 1892, he chartered the Coca-Cola Company in the state of Georgia, capitalized at $100,000. The trademark was registered with the Patent Office the following January. That second step is the one that lasted. A formula can be copied by anyone with a laboratory and a spare afternoon, and plenty of people tried. A registered name cannot. What Candler had actually bought for his $2,300, though he may not have understood it in those terms yet, was a word. Then he did the thing Pemberton never could, which was spend money on making people want it. Candler flooded the country with the name, and he put it on things that were not the drink. Serving trays, calendars, clocks for the drugstore wall, painted brick on the sides of buildings, some of it still faintly readable in small southern towns. You were meant to see the name several times a day, whether or not you were thirsty. Then there was the coupon, which he ran at a scale close to unheard of. Give away the first glass, charge for everyone after. That only works if the product is something people come back to, and Candler had worked out that it was. And the sales went vertical. In 1890, the business sold around 9,000 gallons of syrup. By 1900, it was selling more than 370,000. That is a 40-fold increase inside 10 years on a product that had lost money in its first. The difference between Pemberton and Candler is not a difference of intelligence or of luck. Pemberton was a chemist, and he thought he had made a medicine. Candler was a merchant, and he could see he had a habit. One of those is worth $2,300. The other one is worth everything that followed. And then, in 1899, Asa Candler made the worst business decision of his life: $1 for the bottles. Two men from Chattanooga came to see him, Benjamin Franklin Thomas and Joseph Brown Whitehead, both lawyers, wanted the right to put Coca-Cola in bottles and sell it that way. Candler was not interested. He said no. He kept saying it. Coca-Cola, as far as he was concerned, was a soda fountain product. It was mixed fresh, in front of you, by a man in an apron. Bottling was for cheap imitations, and the bottled drink of that era had a habit of exploding, or going flat, or arriving tasting like something else. He thought it was a fad and a risk to the name. So on the 21st of July, 1899, he gave them what they asked for: exclusive rights to bottle Coca-Cola across almost the entire United States. The price was $1. The syrup they would buy from him was fixed at a set price, and the contract had no expiration date on it at all. By most accounts, he never even collected the dollar. Candler kept the fountain business he believed in. Thomas and Whitehead got the right forever to build the entire packaged drink industry on top of somebody else's product at a price that could never rise. The bottling contract is one of the great business blunders in American history, and nothing else in this trade comes near it, because bottling was not a fad. Bottling is what took the drink off that one counter in Atlanta and put it in every general store, every gas station, every icebox, every corner of the country where there was no soda fountain and never would be. The bottlers built the plants and worked the territories, and they got rich in a way that is difficult to overstate. They were, in the language of the period, the men who made the South's fortunes. One line of that family, the Luptons, would produce an estate a generation later reported at around $200 million, and the company that invented the product was buying its own growth at a fixed price it had agreed to in 1899. The arithmetic of that fixed price is brutal. Coca-Cola sold the bottlers syrup at a rate agreed in 1899. It did not matter what happened afterward to the cost of sugar, or to the value of the dollar, or to how enormous the bottling business became. The company's income from the largest part of its own product was frozen at a number set by a man who thought bottling would not last. Every bottle sold made the bottler richer. It made the company almost exactly as rich as it had been the year before. It took a war to break it. When sugar prices went wild after the First World War, the company tried to declare the contracts dead. The bottlers sued, and the whole thing ended in the consent decrees of 1921, which kept the arrangement permanent, but finally tied the syrup price to the market. Candler had bought the entire company for about $2,300. 8 years later, he sold its largest future for $1 he never picked up. He was 66 when the war ended, and he had already handed what was left to his children. The children's cell. By 1916, Asa Candler was in his mid-60s and losing interest. His wife was ill. He had spent 30 years on the thing, and he wanted to do something else with what was left, which turned out to be public life and giving money away. He served as mayor of Atlanta from 1917. He had already put $1 million behind moving Emory University to Atlanta, a decision that shapes that city to this day. And at Christmas of 1917, he gave the company away. Not sold, gave. He divided the bulk of his Coca-Cola stock among his 5 children, keeping very little back for himself. He was 65. He was finished with it. He wanted to watch them run it. He had decided the next generation should have the thing while he was still alive to see what they did with it. What they did was sell it. On the 22nd of August, 1919, the Candler children sold the Coca-Cola Company to a syndicate led by an Atlanta banker named Ernest Woodruff, who ran the Trust Company of Georgia. The price was $25 million, $15 million of it in cash, $10 million in preferred stock. It was, at the time, the largest business transaction the American South had ever seen. There is a detail attached to that sale that gets repeated in every telling, and it comes from secondary accounts rather than from Asa Candler himself, so take it as reported. He was not consulted. That the man who bought the formula out of a dying pharmacist's hands and spent 3 decades making it a household word, learned that his family had sold it in the manner that anyone else learns things, which is afterward. Whether that account is exactly right is less important than what is not in dispute, which is that Asa Candler had already given the stock away. He had handed his children the power to do it, deliberately, 2 years earlier, on the reasoning that a father should watch his sons manage what he built. They managed it by converting it to cash. Woodruff moved fast. The company was reincorporated in Delaware, and within weeks, roughly 500,000 shares were sold to the public at $40 each. Coca-Cola was no longer a family concern in any sense. It was a listed stock. And then it nearly died. In 1920, the price of sugar went berserk. The company had bought heavily at the top of the market and was left holding enormous quantities of it as the price collapsed, while its own income from the bottlers was still pinned to that fixed contract from 1899. The stock fell to around $18, less than half what the public had paid for it a year earlier. The company's own lawyer described it as a frail vessel in a storm. 1 year after the biggest deal in the history of the South, the buyers were staring at the possibility that they had bought a corpse. The Candler children, meanwhile, had taken their money in 1919 and were watching the whole thing wobble from a safe distance. Whatever else can be said about the timing of that sale, they got out at the top and somebody else caught the fall. Ernest Woodruff needed somebody to fix it. He had a son he did not get along with. The boss, Robert Winship Woodruff, was born in 1889 and had spent most of his adult life proving he did not need his father. He had walked out of college and never gone back. He had taken a job buying machinery, then selling trucks, and he had been extremely good at the selling, to the point where he was running the White Motor Company's operation and earning a great deal of money on his own account. In 1923, at 33 years old, he took the presidency of Coca-Cola. It cost him about $50,000 a year to do it because his new salary was a fraction of what he had been making. He took the job anyway. He was 33. The company was broken. He kept it until everyone who had doubted him was dead. Everyone called him the boss. He stepped down as president in 1955 and stayed on the board until 1984, and giving up the title changed nothing whatsoever about who decided things. His shareholding and his seat on the finance committee were enough. Presidents of Coca-Cola came and went and consulted him. He ran it from a chair for the better part of 60 years without ever needing to be called the man in charge. The problem he inherited in 1923 was not a small one. The company had a sugar disaster behind it, a fixed-price contract with its own bottlers that it could not escape, a share price that had humiliated everyone who bought at 40, and a founding family that had walked away. It also had a drink that people liked more than any other drink in the country, which turned out to be enough. What he did first was unglamorous. He fixed the quality, standardized the product, chased down bottlers who were selling something that tasted wrong, and started treating the drink as a thing that had to be identical in every town in America. Then came the war, and the decision that made Coca-Cola a global fact rather than an American one. In 1941, Woodruff ordered that every man in uniform be able to get a bottle of Coca-Cola for 5 cents, wherever he was, whatever it cost the company to put it there. Read as patriotism, it is a fine gesture. Read as strategy, it is close to the most effective distribution decision anyone has ever made. And there is no need to decide which it was, because it worked as both. The military agreed. After a request from Eisenhower's command in 1943, the company was granted an exemption from sugar rationing for anything going to the armed forces, and it began building bottling plants directly behind the fighting. 64 of them, overseas, staffed by company men shipped out in uniform who came to be called the Coca-Cola Colonels. Billions of bottles went to American troops across the war. That mattered enormously once the shooting stopped. Coca-Cola never had to enter the world market after 1945 because it was already standing in it. The plants were built, the taste was familiar, and an entire generation of young men in dozens of countries had learned to associate that bottle with the best news they had heard in years. Asa Candler had spent his life making Americans want it. Woodruff made everybody else want it, and he did it on the government's logistics. He had built something no family had ever held, and he had nobody to hand it to, no heir. Robert Woodruff and his wife, Nell Hodgson Woodruff, had no children. There is nothing more to it than that. No estrangement in the record, no falling out, no disinherited son. There was simply nobody. He married her in 1912, she died in 1968, and in 56 years together, they produced no one to hand the company to. Think about what that means for a fortune of that size. A man with children has an obvious answer to the question of what happens next. He divides it, or he entails it, or he builds a trust and argues about it. Woodruff had none of those options, and about 60 years to think about it. So he did the only other thing available, which is give it away and put it somewhere it cannot be sold again. He gave it to Emory. He gave it anonymously for years, to the point where the university took to referring to an unnamed benefactor, and everyone in Atlanta knew perfectly well who it was. He gave it through foundations he controlled. He gave it to hospitals, to the arts, to the city itself. And Atlanta today is substantially a place that Robert Woodruff paid for. The largest single act came in 1979. He and his brother George gave Emory about $105 million in the form of 3 million shares of Coca-Cola stock. It was the first gift of 9 figures ever made to an American university. Across his lifetime, by the university's own accounting, he directed more than $230 million to Emory. Then there was Itchaway, his place in South Georgia. Around 29,000 acres of longleaf pine, bought for quail hunting in the 1920s, where he entertained presidents and generals and did a great deal of his actual governing. In his will, he asked that it be kept as a natural preserve. It did not go to an heir because there was no heir. It became an ecological research station instead, and it still is one. Robert Winship Woodruff died on the 7th of March, 1985. He was 95 years old. I have not found any indication that he minded the arrangement, and there is no reason to assume he did. He had been the most powerful man in Atlanta for 6 decades, and he left the company he had run for 60 years in the hands of professional managers and public shareholders. because there was no one else to leave it to. And with him, the third family runs out. Pemberton's line ended in 1894 with a man dying of opium. The Candlers ended their connection deliberately in one afternoon in 1919 for cash. The Woodruffs ended because biology ended them, which leaves the question of who owns it now. Whose name is on it now? The answer is available to anybody because it is filed publicly every year. Its largest single shareholder is Berkshire Hathaway, the investment vehicle run for decades by Warren Buffett out of Omaha, Nebraska. Berkshire began buying in 1988 and finished with 400 million shares, for which it paid roughly $1.3 billion. That stake is around 9% of the company. It is now worth many times what was paid for it, and in a single recent year, it produced more than $800 million in dividends alone. After Berkshire come the index funds. Vanguard holds roughly 8.5%. BlackRock holds around 7%. Between them, three institutions that had nothing to do with any of this hold about a quarter of a company now valued at more than $300 billion. None of those three institutions did anything remarkable to get there. They bought shares on an open market, in ordinary quantities, over ordinary years, the way anyone can. That is the entire mechanism by which the ownership of the most famous product on Earth passed out of the hands of the people who made it and into the hands of people who simply kept buying it. Nobody built a defense against this. No special share class, no trust holding the votes, nothing anywhere in the structure that reserves so much as one seat for anybody named Pemberton, Candler, or Woodruff. There never was. The formula sits in a vault in a museum in Atlanta where it was moved in 2011, and people buy a ticket and walk past it. The Candler building, the 17-story tower Asa put up in 1906 when it was the tallest thing in the city, is a hotel. You can book a room in it. And the drink itself is sold in more than 200 countries and territories at a price that is no longer 5 cents anywhere on Earth. So the chronology runs out here, and the obvious readings do not survive it. Cheated is the first one, and it does not hold, because nobody was tricked. Foolish is the second, and it holds even less, which becomes clear the moment you put the three exits side by side. Because you are dying. Because the price is good. Because there is nobody standing behind you. Those are not three mistakes. They are three ordinary human situations, and the product was simply worth more than any one person's ability to sit still and keep it. What strikes me looking at the three of them together is how reasonable each decision was at the time. I keep expecting to find a villain in it, and there is not one. Pemberton was in agony and needed cash. The Candler children were offered $25 million in 1919 for a soft drink company, which was an extraordinary amount of money for what was still, in living memory, a syrup that lost money. Woodruff had no children. 3 different doors out of the same building, and every one of them looked like the sensible way through at the time. The list of what survived is enormous. A formula, a logo drawn by a bookkeeper in 1886 that has never needed replacing. 100-odd years of the most effective advertising ever made. Emory University, the Woodruff Arts Center, a research station in the Longleaf Pines, and a skyline in Atlanta with these names on it. What did not survive is ownership. Not one share in any of the 3 families of the thing all 3 of them made, which brings it back to the marble counter in Atlanta and the nickel and the glass. 5 cents bought a Coca-Cola in 1886 when the man who made the syrup was carrying it down the street in a jug and taking about 9 glasses a day. 5 cents still bought one in 1959, 73 years later, by which time it was being drunk on every continent on Earth. Through 2 world wars, a depression, and prohibition, the price did not move. Everything else did. There is no Coca-Cola family. There is a formula in a vault, a name on a building in Atlanta, and 400 million shares in Omaha. One question before you go. $25 million in 1919 in your hand today, or you hold the stock and you never see what it becomes, and neither does anybody you know. Tell me in the comments which one you take, because I am not sure I would have held either. Hit subscribe and we'll see you in the next one.